Hey everyone, Dylan here. Today we're going to be doing a quick teardown of the Miyoo A30. This is actually a brand new device, apart from my personal device. I bought it to mod and gift it to my girlfriend. But before I actually replace a lot of stuff in here, I want to show you all how to actually take this apart and get started on modding this device. So let's get right into it. Now to start everything off, we first want to remove the 4 Phillips screws from the back of the device. The orientation in which you remove these screws doesn't really matter, just make sure you don't lose them. Now that the screws are removed, it's time for the actual hard part of the teardown, taking the back off of the device. The back is held in by small plastic clips, and we basically want to force these clips open. So how to do that, you want to take your metal spudger and insert it along the back of the device and the center plastic. You want to slowly move it in between the center of the device and the back, and this might require a little bit force than expected, but you want to move it along, and the space between the center of the device and the back should start increasing. Eventually, you should hear a light snap, and the clips will actually be released. Then you could actually, with your hands, carefully pull off the back of the device. So this actually took me a while, about 10 minutes in real time, so make sure to take your time in this. After the back is off, you may notice that one of the clips may have actually broken. This is okay, as in my experience, this actually doesn't affect the feel of the device at all, but if you want to keep the internals of your device in pristine state, just don't open it up. With the back of the device now removed, we can move on to the internal components. First is the battery. We want to remove the plug from the motherboard with our fingers, not anything metal, as we don't want to short the leads of the battery out. This can ruin your battery. Just tug from the plastic JST plug, not from the cable, as we don't want to pull the wire from the plug. If you actually can't get a good grip on the connector, just use your fingernails or a non-metal spudger to kind of dislodge the connection out. Let's now work on removing the analog stick. So using a non-metal spudger or your fingernail, just flip up the back tab at the back of the analog stick cable connection. This will essentially free it to move out. I then push the analog stick from the front of the device and lightly pull on the ribbon cable to then remove it from that connection. With the analog stick out of here, we can then remove the complete front of the device. Here, I use my fingernails. I recommend you use a spudger to then unclip the front off, a lot similar to removing the back. It should be a lot easier to remove though. Be careful of the LED cover. This can fall out when removing the front. And at this stage, you can do things such as install a lanyard loop to replace the LED cover. If you want this, links are in the description to actually buy this from me, or files to actually 3D print it yourself. When you get the front off, some buttons will likely fall out, and the shoulder buttons will definitely fall out if you haven't taken them out already. You can note that they've been gone for a while. But just be sure that all buttons and membranes are actually accounted for. I actually take a moment here to organize everything. Organization is super important when taking these apart. You don't want to reassemble your device and learn that you've lost some parts and then have to scour for them on the floor. I've definitely made that mistake before. Let's then work on removing the speakers. So with tweezers, you can pry up on the small nub on the side of the speaker and it should just lift out. Pretty easy. Next, we can remove the screen, and it's pretty similar to removing the analog stick. First, lift up the clip holding the ribbon cable in place, and then carefully remove the ribbon cable from the connector, just a gentle tug. You can then bring the ribbon cable to the front, and then finally remove the screen. To remove the motherboard from the internal frame, you can pull back on the frame while pushing on the PCB shown. I first start with the center on the side of the SD card slot, and then move to the edge of the device to then finally be able to remove the motherboard. Some buttons may actually fall out when removing the PCB, so just make sure to keep track of these. The last simple step is to then just remove the buttons from the internal frame. So with this, you should be completely done with the teardown. If you've gotten this far, please take stock of all the components and make sure that you aren't missing any. Use this image as a reference to compare if needed. Let's now work in reverse to get this reassembly started. So first, insert all the buttons into the internal frame. Some of them have little clips that hold them in place to properly align the buttons, so just make sure that they're clipped onto the little nubs on the inside of the frame. Let's then reinsert the motherboard into the internal frame. Start by inserting the side with the USB-C port into the frame, and then you can then push the remainder of the sides in. Now we can reinsert the screen. First, bring the ribbon cable through the motherboard and gently insert into the connector. Then, again, with a fingernail or a spudger, just push down the clip to hold the cable in place. To check that it's actually seated well, lightly tug on it with your fingers to ensure that that cable is not going anywhere. We can then start on reassembling the front of the device. So push the speaker into its slot by lining up that little nub and push it all the way to the bottom. Then reinsert the buttons in the D-pad into their correct places and place the membranes over them. So make sure to line up the membranes with the pegs on the back and push them in so that they stay in place while you actually put the front back on the device. This is also now a good time to check if the LED shroud cover is still on, so if it isn't, just reinsert it. Now, let's actually put the front on. So you want to make sure that the screen is lined up with these little raised edges on the internal frame that hold it laterally in the correct position. It's really important that the screen is lined up, as you don't want to mess this up and smash your screen because you push the front on too hard if the screen isn't aligned and you actually crack it. So then, take the front of the device, line it up the internal frame, and push it onto it, starting with one of the sides, and then the top and bottom, and then the other side. If you feel too much resistance, check that the screen is lined up. You really don't want to push into the screen, and otherwise, if all things are good, you should hear the clip snap into place, and everything should be lined up. The assembly should be all smooth sailing from here. Push the analog stick into the front of the device and seat the ribbon cable in the connector. Push the clip down, and same as the screen, give it a very light tug just to be sure that it's seated well. Let's now reinsert the shoulder buttons. Make sure that they are on the correct side, between left and right, and put them in. Make sure that the little fins on the side are actually behind the edges of the device, just to be sure that you can push down on them properly. For the final last steps, you can then plug back in the battery and pull the back onto the device. Make sure that the shoulder buttons are seated correctly. Push on the back and push it in until you hear the light snap the clips. Then, screw in the 4 Phillips screws and you're completely done. Then, wrap things up and test your device in full to make sure that everything is working. If some things aren't going well after reassembly with your device, let's go over some quick troubleshooting FAQs. If your device isn't turning on, it could be really easy fix or no fix. So first, check that the battery is connected well, and lastly, check that you didn't damage anything on the motherboard. If any components are missing, anything else is broken, you might be screwed. So just be careful on reassembly, make sure you don't scratch off any components. So if your screen or analog stick do not work, just make sure that the cables for each of these are connected. I think this is a little bit easier to repair compared to your motherboard, but just make sure that the ribbon cables are seated, or if any of them are damaged, you can likely get a replacement analog stick or screen. So, if your buttons don't feel good anymore, this can be due to a few issues. So, if your screws on the back are too loose or too tight, they could be putting too much pressure or not enough pressure on the membranes, causing the feel to be bad. So just loosen or tighten these screws can greatly help. Also, if the membranes on the inside aren't seated well, just open your device back up and reseat these membranes and buttons to make sure that they feel better. So if your device isn't closing, just make sure that the shoulder buttons and the screen are seated properly. If either of these are out of whack, it might make it hard to close, so just make sure that they're in the right position. And if you have any issues, feel free to leave a comment and I'll try to help you troubleshoot any questions you might have. Lastly, if you want to support what I do, feel free to visit my Etsy and buy some of my accessories. I think they're pretty great, or some of my mods, or visit my printables where you can actually get 3D models of my accessories and mods, or even become a member to support me further. Thanks for watching.